So, welcome back. Now it's time for the section number 9. In section 8, we were talking about the summary of owners, so we could really see that there are different owners and they differ. Now it's time to deal with a very small part of comparative governance. It's a huge area, and I will just touch upon it a little bit because I expect that others at this course and other places will dwell more on these fascinating things that is comparative governance. Comparative governance, it says, because it deals with the differences between governance systems. I mentioned several times that US, UK differ to Sweden and continental Europe and even Asia. Business groups are quite common on the continent, in Sweden and in some Asian countries. It doesn't really exist in US and UK. There are differences, and they are due to different traditions, different history, different legal structures, and different ideological development in the societies. Especially La Porta is the article that is read in order to find the differences. However, La Porta has a tendency to stress to not have a balanced view of the different governance systems. Some claim that these different governance systems are getting closer to each other, and especially the UK-US system that is the center, and then everyone else is going closer to US-UK. Maybe because there are so much financial capital in US-UK that are financed in other corporations, so they have to at least pretend that they look like a US-UK corporation in order to attract these financial funds. That is a huge debate whether we are separate, developing different systems, or if we are converging into one system, and which system is the one. I mean, this is almost like football. Those people that are a little bit primitive, supporting a football team, and then hope that the other team will join this team. So it would be nice for me, for example, to say that the Swedish system is the most competitive, the most efficient system. That is the one that will survive, and we can see signs of it in US, for example, that the board gains more power. In US, the board is very weak, and in Sweden it's very strong. On the other hand, the Swedish CEO is very weak, but in US it's very strong. But now they are dismantling the power of the CEO, which indicate that US is converging to the Swedish or the Nordic system of governance, which really is not true. You have to be able to avoid looking at many empirical data in order to find that conclusion, which is the same at the other way around. It's really hard to find out if there is a convergence or not. But I have done it so very simple in order with 3 figures how to describe these cultural views of the corporation. First, here is the ideal corporation. The ideal corporation is when you have equity owners. These are the ones that are red. You have creditors. Those are the ones that are assuming that the risk of the corporation, because they lend money to the corporation and maybe they don't get the money. And then we have employees. Those are the ones that invest a lot of labor in the corporation. Maybe these are the ones that the main stakeholders that influence the corporation. And then there is a very small thin line where the governance is meeting the management. The management consists then, of course, of the top management team and the CEO. And the board I put here, the board belongs to the governance part, so it's the stakeholders that are controlling the board. And here you have the employees in the firm. So it's a very balanced, the stakeholders trying to influence the firm and the firm. But that is an ideal cooperation that's not existing. Instead, you could have the US-UK cooperation that I've tried to present in this way. There you have the equity owners. Those are the ones that are dominating. Maybe you have a little bit debt holders, but it's totally dominated by the equity owners. But when you look at the firm is overlapping the equity owners. So it's not the equity owners that are overlapping, controlling the firm. It looks almost like the firm is controlling the stakeholders. And that is because the board is controlled not by the equity owners, not by the stakeholders. It's controlled by the top management team and the CEO. So they have gained this control. That's why I try to show it here, and then you have a more step. The firm is more step like this, so it's more hierarchical. I try to show you, and then it's more wider on the equity owners because it's a diversity of owners. You have many owners. They don't influence really the corporation. There are many without any control. They get the profit and they keep their mouth shut. And the control really is within the hands of the board, and the board is in the hands of the management. You can compare it to the Swedish corporation. I tried to show it here, that here you have the equity owners, the creditors, and even the employees, because the employees, for example, at the board, they have the right to participate at the board and to make the decisions. And now it's overlapping on the other side. So the firm is under the stakeholders. And that's my way of showing that the board is very powerful in Sweden. And the board consists not of the managers, not of the top management team like in US and UK. No, the board is totally independent, almost totally independent of the firm, of the corporation. Only one employee have the right. Well, the employees have the right through the union, but only one of the top management team has the right to be part of the board, and that normally is the CEO. And normally there is a 50-50 division. I think it's 56% of the corporations today that have the board, that have the CEO on the board. Else, the CEO, of course, participate at the board meetings as since he or she is the CEO, but do not have any voting power. And then I've tried also to show the flatter structure of the firm, that it's not a step hierarchy, but it's a more flatter organization. So this is my way of showing that there are differences in the corporate governance system between US, UK, and Sweden. Then I've summarized it in this table that is hopeless, really, that there are institutional differences. And that when I make this description of the governance systems, I make one division, one categorization. It's very similar to many others, but I call them the business group system because I stress that the business groups are quite dominant. Maybe that's not so true. Maybe the business groups are slowly disappearing or getting less dominant. But then there is a division between the Germanic and the Latin. And that is, of course, since I'm a European, I tend to say Germanic and Latin. Maybe one could use Asian terms instead of saying the difference between Japanese and Korean way of organizing the corporate governance system. And then on the other side, we have the very exotic Anglo-American system. And I've listed many different descriptions that show the differences. For example, the capital structure is dominated in Anglo-American by equity, but there is much more debt used in the Germanic and the Latin system. The corporation is highly autonomous in the Anglo-American, but that is what I mean when I say that the board is really governed by the top management team. It's the corporation are in the hands mainly of the managers. That is not the case in the Germanic and Latin. That is when you have a communion of ownership and you have these business groups, and the board is much stronger. The ownership structure is typically in the Anglo-American, it's dispersed and it's concentrated in both Germanic and in Latin. The main difference between Germanic and Latin is sometimes that the government is stronger in the Latin system. So the governing body, as I've described here, that in the integrated corporation system, the Anglo-American, the top management, that is the governing body. It's a constellation of stakeholders in the Germanic, maybe a business group, maybe the board. In the Latin, the much more of family governance and the state. The culture is quite different also, the culture of the society. I mean, it's competitive in US, it's cooperative in the Germanic tradition, and it's authoritative in the Latin system. The financial markets, they are very strong in the Anglo-American and rather weak in both Germanic and Latin. And that put a stress that's interconnected with the dispersed ownership structure. And the countries I organized, UK, US, Australia, and Anglo-American, Germany, of course, Sweden, Japan in the Germanic system, the Nordic countries, and then in the Latin, it's Korea, France, Italy. So there are differences. There are at least 3 different economic systems when it concerns governance. The Anglo-American, the Germanic, the Latin, or you could say the Japanese, Korean ones. Then one could think further, and that is my last, where I have the question mark, efficiency. Is this governance system efficient in different environments? Is the turbulent environment, that's where the Anglo-American corporations that are governed by Anglo-American traditions, they are stronger. And then in the stable environment, the Germanic and Latin is stronger. But I don't know, it's just a hypothesis. But the main conclusion is that there are differences between owners, there are differences between in institutional milieu. There are at least 3 different governance systems. And in a way, you could say that they compete. There is the big debate whether they converge. Maybe if the Germanic Latin converge to Anglo-American, I would not say so. In certain aspects, they are converging. That the Germanic and Latin converge to Anglo-American, for example, on the financial structure. Maybe now we see convergence in accounting because IFRS is becoming more and more dominant that the Anglo-American have to adjust to. The power of the board, where the US, when the Anglo-American has accepted the more Nordic way of having strong boards. In a way, it doesn't matter if they converge or not. Maybe it matters. Maybe we don't like it to converge because variety is always better, because then there is always one structure that fits a certain corporation. But that is very small introduction to comparative governance. That is a huge area. It's very fascinating because then you dwell with the institutional differences, the history differences, the differences of traditions, and also of material reasons why there are differences. So that was a total difference from the difference of owners. And now over to something completely different.